Now, energy firm Bulb is one of the biggest in the UK and collapsed into special measures at the start of this week. It follows 22 other energy firms already going out of business. For Bulb alone, the Treasury is to provide almost £1.7 billion of taxpayers' cash. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said he can provide more money for the company if it's needed. Court documents indicate that without the cash, Bulb would not have been able to stay afloat past the middle of December, leaving the more than 1 million people it serves in an incredibly precarious position. But how have we got here? Why is such a huge quantity of taxpayers' money on the line? And could this all have been avoided? Well, hopefully to answer some of these questions, I'm delighted to be joined by the Research Director of the Taxpayers Alliance, Duncan Simpson. Welcome to the programme. Firstly, could this all have been avoided? What has caused so many companies to collapse in such short order?
Well, there's a few factors at play here. Obviously, the spot price for natural gas has increased dramatically since the summer. It's more than doubled, basically, in the space of about 3 months. So that's sort of a immediate short-term pressure for consumers, which they're now experiencing. And as you say, there have been dozens of companies which have collapsed in the UK in recent weeks. Looking slightly further back, though, I mean, a big cause of this are the policies of Theresa May. I mean, one of the really dreadful things that she did when she was Prime Minister, that she introduced an energy price cap, which essentially means that the dual fuel bill is capped by the regulator Ofgem. And that's pretty dangerous for several reasons. I mean, if you look at the profit margins for a lot of the energy companies before they were introduced, they're relatively small. So they were sort of between 3 and 5% in the 5 years preceding the introduction of the cap in January 2019. Post the introduction of the cap, profit margins have essentially disappeared, and that's dangerous for these companies and consumers because it means they can't retain some of their profits and keep cash and cash equivalents back so as to alter some of the tariffs for consumers. And precisely when we are faced with the current situation whereby global energy prices have been increasing dramatically, they don't have the dry powder, as it were, to actually help out their customers. So the longer term effects of the introduction of that price cap are now being unfortunately felt by millions of customers across the UK.
Given that there were so many dozens of companies that have just gone out of business, but that were operating in previous years, doesn't that suggest that the market was sort of working? That there was enough competition that people might have had the impetus to switch, that prices would have been kept low by the market, and that this price cap intervention was less than necessary and potentially counterproductive?
Seemingly so. I mean, obviously, to a large extent, actually, the market is pretty much dominated by the big 6 energy companies. There were many new upstart companies which came onto the market again in the years preceding the energy cap, and then that slightly declined after its introduction. So yes, in effect, it was a thriving, bubbly market. But as I said, it's these kind of policy changes which were introduced a few years back, which frankly were entirely unnecessary. Obviously, you can understand the rationale. The outgoings that you have to put up for a dual fuel tariff for any household or many households across the UK are pretty vast. But these are the unintended consequences of what was introduced. I mean, it was relatively axiomatic that something like this may well happen. But yes, indeed, it was a pretty thriving market. So I think, policy which could be introduced reasonably soon be the scrapping of the energy price cap at some stage reasonably soon. I mean, obviously, the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has said this is a relatively temporary arrangement with Bulb Energy. As you say, about £2 billion of taxpayers' cash has been given to the administrators, which effectively run this company on a sort of quasi-nationalised basis for a period of time. But that's the real danger. I mean, it's a moral hazard giving cash to this company. As disastrous and horrible it is for their customers at the moment, it sets a very worrying precedent whereby the government can just sort of step in and pick on a particular industry and dole out £2 billion of cash. So this really shouldn't be repeated in the future.
I suppose that sort of bailout might encourage poor behaviour from other firms because they can just rely on a bailout if they go out of business. Now, I have to say I asked the Prime Minister's spokesman about the energy price cap earlier this week, and he said that there are absolutely no plans to scrap it. Isn't the problem here that people quite like the sound of the energy price cap, that even though it might be counterproductive, the sort of the multiple stages of thinking you need to realise that position, the easy peasy lemon squeezy option for the government here is to sit on their hands and not change it?
Seemingly so, yes. I mean, I think the cap has recently been slightly increased for many companies. It affects, I think, most dual fuel tariffs, but not fixed rate tariffs. It affects most customers in the country, but not all of them. But yes, I mean, it's seemingly reasonably popular. Now, of course, the government could go to the House of Commons on Monday morning and declare that they're nationalising the entirety of the energy industry, and I'm sure that would be particularly popular. But again, you would see exactly the same issues which you saw across numerous industries in the UK and indeed across the West, whereby that kind of heavy government intervention means that companies don't invest in capital. Energy companies in particular are very, very capital intensive. I mean, it's a vast and expensive network to maintain. So obviously, if the government is then, if they were to dive in and nationalise everything and sort of declare a set price or a lower price, then you would have exactly the same kind of problems, and these would build up relatively quickly. So yes, I think unfortunately the spokesman and yourself are probably right that it does seem to be very popular, but the bad side effects, unfortunately, we're now beginning to see.
It's a troublesome issue and no easy solution, no doubt. But for now, Duncan Simpson, thank you very much for joining us this morning.